Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Hello there and welcome back to Valdis Story. Last time we arrived at Ishk and now we're going to explore the place, talking to every NPC as we did with the previous hubs. Getting some various useful bits of information. Their mana heater has been acting up lately, says Schultz, staring with black dead eyes, like a doll's eyes. Seriously, I overall like the art style in this game, but some of the character designs do look a little bit strange. I think it was intending to go for the pitch black eyes for cuteness effect that anime likes to go for with its designs, but didn't exactly work out there. Anyway, here's the plot dump that we're going to be getting as to why we're going to be exploring the dungeon that we're going to be exploring today. Could I have said that more repetitively? Probably not, but it is what it is. So basically, angels and demons are sending their forces down here for some reason, which this man isn't going to tell us about unless we retrieve his hammer from the dangerous area below. The most notable thing about this conversation is that Reina actually has some good lines in it. Well, that was rude, for example there. Kinda makes me wish this game had actual voice acting. Even bad amateur voice acting would make some of these lines pretty great. Wait, so you want me to go down into a temple infested with demons to retrieve a hammer? Oh, it is what it is though. So in addition to talking to all these NPCs, we're also going to be, well, talking to merchants and taking part of their services. There are quite a few useful merchants and other NPCs in this area. It's always worth exploring the towns before venturing onwards, especially to make sure that you're properly geared up. The next area's difficulty can vary wildly depending on what you go into the area equipped with, as I'll be explaining in further detail when we actually get there. First though, a member of the crew. Not the only one we'll be finding this update. Now is when the game just starts throwing crew members at you one after the other. In this one here, Kante is immediately useful. He is a new assist, and unlike the previous assist, he has a shockingly long cooldown time. You can only use him once every 30 seconds, but he's appropriately powerful for that long cooldown time. A trickster spell confuses nearby enemies, and then he also offers a little bit of a defense boost / HP restoration. That's not why you want to use him though, you want to use him because of that confusion spell, as we'll be seeing. Now, Misha here is one of the most useful merchants in the game because she's one of the few accessory merchants. And as I think I've stated before, accessories are probably the most important piece of equipment for giving special effects and really making your character's build stand out. That brooch there in particular is something we'll be wanting to aim for because it gives us health leech, health restoration when hitting enemies whenever we crit. And as an agility focused build, we're going to be critting a lot, so that's a lot of HP restoration. Sadly, we don't quite have the materials for it yet. We do, however, have the materials for this cooling elixir, and unlike previous instances where I showed off a status effect, here I'm just going to buy the elixir straight up. And that's because while freezing may have been annoying and poison may have been aggravating, burning is friggin' deadly. As I'll explain once we actually get to the point where we'll be being burned. Or would've without the elixir. That strange child there offers the rare jewels for a number of the lesser version of each type. It's worth picking up a large emerald because that can be one of the more difficult items to obtain a bunch of, especially early on in the game. And we're also going to be picking up a health charm here because more health never hurts. And we've reached the point where we're picking up enough of these common materials that we might as well purchase the less useful stuff. We'll still have plenty of materials for the rarer stuff. So yeah, that's the preparation that we're going to be doing for heading into the Guardian Temple. Although I'll probably just refer to it as the Fire Temple from now on because that's kind of its gimmick. So as you'd probably expect of a fire-themed area, coming fully loaded with ice spells is ideal here. Even though we're not an intelligence build, the basic projectile spells still do enough damage to the smaller targets to be really useful, and the ice buff will come in especially handy. And now that we actually have full angelic aligned spells equipped, I can actually show off the affinity system. Basically, everything that you can equip in this game has some sort of affinity. Gear, accessories, weapons, spells, they're all either angelically, demonically, or divinely aligned. And if you have enough angelically or demonically aligned stuff equipped, it will shift your alignment to be demonic or angelic. If it's not enough of a shift, then you end up being divine or neutral. Now, why this matters is that, based on how many core stats you have, and what your alignment currently is, you'll end up receiving special bonuses. For example, as an agility build, for every 5 points of agility, we'll receive some sort of bonus based on our alignment. If we're angelically aligned, it will be a 5% attack speed boost. If we're divinely aligned as we were until now, it would be a 5% crit damage boost. So this is yet another way that you can differentiate your character when you're building them. It doesn't make a huge difference, but having the proper bonuses could give you the edge you need if you're having trouble with a boss fight or something. Yeah, one of the annoying things about this area is that it involves a lot of waiting for these floating platforms to move up and down, so that you can actually make it to certain areas. Frog, would you kindly get out of my throat? Thank you. So, for waiting for that quite literal elevator, we were able to make our way up here and acquire yet another Book of the Old Gods. We'll give Ladin some new reading materials soon enough, I swear. We want to wait until we've unlocked a few certain NPCs before heading back to the library. That way we can do some real business there. So, one detail I want to make immediate note of here is that in previous versions of the game, there didn't used to be a floor down here. If you fell down, you would be dropping into the room below, which, as you may have noted if you were paying attention, was locked by a demon door. That, too, is a change. Previously, it wasn't locked at all and you could enter it. And in fact, dropping down was often the best way of acquiring the treasure there. It's a lot of changes that they've made to this game during its development. I'm not really sure what the point of this one was. I guess it makes the platforming a bit less of a chore, but it was really never that big of a deal in the first place in my opinion. So now's a good time to bring up, you notice that I made a few mistakes there and took a little bit of damage, but nothing major. If I didn't have that cooling elixir equipped, do you think that would still be the same? If you answered yes, you'd be absolutely wrong, because if I did not have that cooling elixir equipped, and I was hit there, I probably would have died. I'd have been resurrected by one of the healing potions, of course, but that would be a healing potion down, and us in a trickier position. And that is because burning is an incredibly dangerous status effect. Cutting away a bit just to discuss V's. He's a new assist and more generally useful than Kante, but we're going to be sticking with Kante. His ability to temporarily stun and then mute all of the enemies in a room is so useful here, considering that so many of the enemies are mages. It actually prevents them not just from attacking, but from teleporting as well, which is really useful. But yeah, the thing about burning is that, whereas other status effects are a slow burn, burning is a fast burn. I probably could have chosen a less confusing way to state that, but hopefully that made sense. Basically, what makes burning so dangerous is that when burning is active, you take extra damage from fire attacks. And even worse, the burning effect can stack with itself and increase that boost to damage that you take from fire. So basically what'll happen is you'll take one hit from fire and it'll proc a burning effect. Okay, not too much damage. But then you'll get hit a second time and you'll take even more damage than the first time and have an even stronger DOT applied. And then if you get hit a third time, you'll take even more damage and an even stronger DOT will be applied, and so on and so forth. And since most of the enemies in this area have multiple hitting attacks, all it takes is for you to get hit once, get stun lock, get hit a few times, and all of a sudden you're drop dead and need to use a healing potion. So the most important thing you can do to come into this area outfitted properly is to purchase one of those cooling elixirs. It lasts long enough that you shouldn't have to worry about it running out at all, even if you take a while to explore the area. 45 minutes is plenty. So yeah, that's your daily PSA on always using elixirs. Drugs are good for you kids, at least when they're provided by your local adventuring store. So one thing I kind of glossed over there, as I so often do, I really don't give myself enough time to talk when I'm recording these, do I? That armor we picked up from that time puzzle, which, by the way, would have been so much more difficult if we didn't have the insta-charging effect from the mana keystone. Seriously, get the mana keystone upgrade. Also, I meant to do that to get hit by the spikes there. But the armor we picked up, the Goibnu armor, is pretty unique in that it has one of the special effects I mentioned that armor sets sometimes have. And its is that when you're at less than 30% health, critical health, you end up ignoring all of an enemy's armor when attacking them with physical attacks. And that is a rather notable special effect, because as we get further into the game, what'll result in an enemy taking a while to kill is not mountains of HP, although that is sometimes part of it, especially with the bosses. It's the fact that they won't take much damage in the first place because they just have bonkers resistances. Now, you ignore a certain part of that defense based off of your armor rune stat for physical damage or spell rune stat for magical damage, but they're always going to resist some amount, so being able to ignore all of their defense is a pretty considerable damage boost, which actually makes that armor worth wearing even for builds other than strength-focused builds. Although it is best with strength-focused builds. But we're sticking with the Judicator's Raiment, of course, because having 2 skill cancels at this point in the game is, I'm not going to say necessary, but if you want to have an easy time S-ranking bosses, you're going to want that. Unless you know their patterns perfectly, 1 skill cancel isn't enough to get out of trouble if you make a mistake. And you probably will, considering how hectic the boss fights get. So there I did a little bit of a dance because this armor here is one we're going to be using quite a lot throughout the game. Once we wean ourselves off of the Judicator's Raiment, that is. It provides a general smattering of stat bonuses, very well-rounded armor set in that regard. But most notably it has the special bonus of massively boosting your punching and kicking damage when in focus mode. As an agility-focused build, our best weapons are our bare fists and feet. As an agility-focused build, we're going to be spending a lot of time in focus mode. As an agility-focused build, and especially as Reina, you would be foolish not to be using the monk's robes. So here we come across another member of the crew, Honestavian. You can trust him because it's in his name. So he's one of the more useful NPCs that you can recruit back to the library because he is a merchant, an accessory merchant at that. And he offers some of the most game-changing accessories you can find. But that's gonna be for later when we actually return to the library. For now, we're gonna have to continue going through this temple here. So, something you may have noticed is that we're not exactly having too much trouble with the enemies here. Whereas in previous areas, there were usually at least a few encounters that we ended up having trouble with. But even this one here with the de facto tough mini-boss fight before the boss fight, it's still not all that difficult, and that comes down to 2 things. One, the cooling elixirs. Seriously, they make a huge difference in how much difficulty you have in an area where a status effect is the main gimmick. But 2, this is where Reina really starts to come into her own. She is an advanced character to play as because she starts off a little bit weaker than Wyatt or really any of the starting characters. But more so than any of the others, she gets strong really goddamn quickly, especially if you're focusing purely on agility. A pure agility Reina build is probably one of the easiest times you can have in this game, especially if you're using a lot of gear to that effect. That's just one of the things I love about this game. There's so much RPG stuff in addition to the more action, platinum combat style sort of stuff. And it means that even if you're not the most reactive-based person who is skilled at those sorts of games, you can still end up having a fairly easy time just by being smart and thinking about what would actually aid your character's build, how you're choosing to play them. Okay, so let's actually talk about something that's occurring on screen. Unusual for me, I know, but yeah. So we get to the boss fairly quickly here. Guardian Temple is one of the easier dungeons if you don't have to deal with the hassle of a huge amount of fire damage. And Jazwacht here is similar in that regard in that he's really not all that difficult of a boss. if you get hit by him and you don't have an elixir equipped, you're probably going down really quickly. He's very strong due to just how strong fire and burning are, as I went over before. But if you take that element out of the equation, he's kind of a nothing boss. Basically, he just has a few basic attacks that are easy enough to avoid, and then after you do enough damage, he goes into this crazy tornado thing where you have to constantly move around to avoid those fire lasers. But as long as you move back and forth, it's not really an issue. Actually, thinking about it for a second here, if there were one notable aspect of this boss, it would be that there are so many ways that you can utterly clown this jackass. So, one is by using an ice buff. Now, if you don't hit him with ice damage periodically, he will end up creating a fire shield that does a lot of fire damage, especially without a cooling elixir, and will force you back as well as stun locking you and allowing him to get in a few free hits. But if you're constantly doing ice damage because of an ice buff, that element is completely removed from the fight. His melee attacks too are incredibly easy to parry, so if you have that ability, he can't really do much to you at all when he's in his active attacking phase. And while you may have trouble avoiding the fire lasers at first, once you've seen them once, it's really not hard to avoid them reliably all times in the future. Even more so is the fact that you can actually knock him out of this phase if you attack him with a ranged attack. Melee attacks don't really work because you're going to get hit by the tornado and stun lock before you can actually hit with them. I don't bother to do that here because it's not necessary and it's kind of a pain in the ass with this arena here. Magic doesn't exactly home the best. I'd basically have to hop onto one of those fire throwers on the side really quickly, jump forward and do an air ice spell, and that's honestly too much work for me to bother. But yeah, Jazract here, despite his powerful nature as a fire demon, is kind of a chump. And Reina will actually comment on that after the fight, as will the other characters if you're playing through as them. By the way, we got the ass rank as usual. Yep, that demon had an incredible amount of power, but didn't really wield it all that efficiently. So, despite Jazract being probably the easiest boss up to this point, he offers some of the most useful rewards. For S ranking him, we now have a constant 15% base affliction chance. So even without any other gear, we actually have a decent chance to land status effects when we use them, so that's nice. More usefully, we end up acquiring the Soul of the Fire Lord, or whatever it's called. It might not actually be Fire Lord. Notably, this gives us our new exploration spell. The side move is a punch that allows us to break through those brick walls we've been coming across. That's why there's one at the exit here, kind of telling you that, yeah, you have a new spell. More usefully though, it allows us to do fire damage, which means apply the burning effect. And you know how much I talked it up as how deadly it is to you? It is equally deadly to enemies, especially if you're an intelligence focused build, since your fire damage and burning damage is based off of your magic stat. As an agility focused build, it's not going to do all that much, especially to a fire elemental enemy. But against everything else, especially angelic enemies, especially if you're rocking a magic build, enemies will just completely melt, appropriate I guess since it's fire, if you use the fire buff spell. It's actually so powerful to the point that it was actually nerfed once, and it's still one of the strongest sources of damage you have available in the game. There are a few optional super bosses in this game that are quite tanky and take a while to take down. And before that patch, people could beat them in literally like 5 to 10 seconds by stacking fire damage. It's kind of insane, and even now it's still really good after the nerf. So yeah, Guardian Temple, not a difficult area as long as you come in with fire protection. Gotta spread that SPF evenly, kids. But it has a lot of good rewards, and probably the best one is the final one. Another Master Scroll, another free skill cancel, and we can finally trade in our training wheels. Judicator's Raiment, you were a lot of help, but we're going to something more useful. Monk's Robes whenever we're using our bare fists and feet. And I was just checking there to see if I was demonically aligned. One of the things about Reina is that it's really difficult to get it to be angelic or demonic, which may have plot reasons for that as well, as we'll see much later. But yeah, that's the Guardian Temple, and we're pretty much done. It's just time to return to Sezi and give him his hammer back. That way he can hammer things like a smith. He can pound that hard metal until it's soft. Alright, there's also exposition here. Basically, the big supreme goddess that was around before the war, Valdis, was attacked by her two kids, Morgado the devil and Elagath the angel. They did so they could be queen shits of God Hill. Basically, if you've ever read anything about any mythology, real or fictional, and pantheistic I guess, you basically already know the gist of what's going on here. We need to find the soul of Valdis, which was recovered by the leader of the Gorbmute tribe, Moira, who rent an eye from each goddess, before the forces of either of her two daughters. And to do that, we're gonna have to go on a bit of a fetch quest, finding the materials necessary for the key to enter the area where it's hidden. The important thing to note here is that at this point of the game, it opens up pretty much completely. Aside from the absolutely endgame content and some side stuff that you can only get to with another movement spell that we don't have quite yet, you can do everything in the game. I'm actually thinking about possibly offering a poll for people to vote on as to where I should head first. Not just yet though, we do want to do a little bit of backtracking before we do any sort of progress. Otherwise we could end up missing out on a boss that we ignored. The Western Skyway, the alternate way into Ishq, you want to do that area sooner than later, or the sewers if you chose to take the Skyway to Ishq. Otherwise you will miss out on content. But that'll be for later. For now, we're going to end things off by exploring Sezi's inventory here. He is the neutral armor upgrading merchant, and more importantly, he offers Reina's first extra weapon. Although as you may be noticing here, he's not exactly offering a weapon, but the ability to upgrade it to one of two paths. And that's because we already have the weapon, because we already have all of the weapons. I fibbed a little bit. When you play as a character for the first time, you only start with one or two weapons, their defaults. But when you beat the game with a weapon equipped, you will have that unlocked from the start for any future runs for that character. That actually makes playing through the game again with the same character a lot more fun, since you can use new stuff right from the get-go, rather than like half or 2/3 of the way through the game, which is when you usually end up unlocking this stuff. I chose to stick with unarmed up to this point, keeping you none the wiser, because that's how things would be if I were playing from a fresh file, which I'm not. So yeah, next time we're checking out that staff, and I'm talking fast because I'm running out of time. I don't give myself an